Executive Director for the California Symphony, and we're just so thankful that you chose to join us this Tuesday for a really exciting conversation. So I not only want to thank you, but I also want to thank DRAA, that's the Diablo Regional Arts Association, for supporting us tonight, and the Heller Foundation for supporting us this whole week. This program tonight and our concerts this weekend are part of the California Festival, which, if you haven't heard, is a 2-week festival of new music across the state of California, just really supporting and celebrating the fresh voices that are pushing classical music forward today. And also, I think in a way, the organizations and the musicians that are promoting them as well. So we're glad to have you here as part of our conversation, and I'm really excited to hear what we're going to be talking about today. And for anyone who has never been to a California Symphony event of any kind, we like to say, clap when you want to, and I think in this setting, I think if there's something exciting that you heard, or if you want to jump in with an exclamation, no one's going to stop you. We're all here having this conversation together, because if you didn't read the bio, audience is part of the collaborations that we're talking about, so you can actively collaborate while this is happening. Also, okay, you have drinks, so we're good there. And if it's not a concert, but I'll still say you're allowed to have your cell phone out, whether you want to snap a quick pic, but just keep the phone on silent so we can keep the conversation going. I'm going to turn things over to Diane Nicolini, who has been with Classical Music Radio for 40 years and on our own Classical KDFC for 30. So we're really lucky to have her.
Yeah, that 40 years, I can't, it's on hold. That's the way it is. Thank you so much for being here. And the name of this evening is Composing the Future, a conversation about collaboration in classical music, and that's what it's all about with almost every performance. And as Lisa mentioned, you guys are all part of that collaboration as well. And we have a wonderful panel, absolutely amazing collaborators and creators, and I'm so excited to introduce them to you. First of all, the CEO of the San Francisco Symphony, Matthew Spivey, is here, and among many other things, he brought Esa-Pekka Salonen to the Bay Area, composer as well as conductor, and he was the director of artistic planning with MTT, and so he knows all about commissioning and that kind of thing, and we want to talk to him about the Collaborating Partners program, and he used to be in Baltimore, the general manager of the Baltimore Symphony. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Matthew Spivey. And joining us is an artist described as tenacious and committed and advocate as any composer could dream of. We're talking about pianist Sarah Cahill, who herself has commissioned 70 works for solo piano from such people as John Adams, Terry Riley, Pauline Oliveras, and of course the California Symphony's own Viet Quang. And she has a radio show called Revolutions Per Minute, and you can hear her before many concerts and events with the San Francisco Symphony, and she's a member of the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. Please welcome pianist Sarah Cahill. The composer in residence of the California Symphony, Viet Quang, born in California, described among other things as wildly inventive. His music has been performed by the New York Philharmonic, the Atlanta Symphony, Pacific Symphony, the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, Albany Symphony, Alarm Will Sound, 8th Blackbird, and many others. He has premiered works already with the California Symphony, one work called Next Week's Trees, and another work just last spring with Sarah, Stargazer, a piano concerto. And this weekend, the premiere of Chants of Rain will happen with the California Symphony from Viet, and there is a chance of rain. So there you go. Viet Quang. Well, I'd like to begin, if I could, with Viet and Sarah and talk about your very recent collaboration right here with the California Symphony. And I'm dying to know, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Had you begun work on a work for piano and orchestra, and then Sarah came into the picture, or was it the other way around? How did that happen?
guess I can start. Yeah, so I remember like after the first piece was premiered, Donato Cabrera just kind of asked me, what do you want to do next for your next piece? Donato! Yes, hello Donato.
Yeah. Low profile.
We see you.
And for a number of years I've been sort of prototyping this piano writing that I like to do, that I've done in several pieces, especially during COVID when all I could write was solo and chamber music. I wrote some solo piano pieces as well as a piece for saxophone and piano that use this sort of texture that makes it sound like the piano is attached to a delay pedal. So the piano is essentially playing its own echoes. So every note echoes like 3 or 4 times and creates a cool rhythmic activity. And so I knew I wanted to do something more with that. And especially the saxophone and piano piece has this like melody and this piano writing in it that I always thought could kind of be blown up into something bigger. And then I said, let's do a piano concerto. And then Donato immediately, the first person he thought of to do it was Sarah. And so we just got in touch and we did it.
And how did your approach to writing the work immediately change when you met Sarah?
Well, the thing is, even though we had met, I had known of Sarah for a long time, and I knew her playing. I remember when we first emailed you, described. Well, I asked you what you kind of, the kind of music that you enjoy playing. The word you used to describe it was cosmic. I don't know if you remember that. And I was like, well, this like echoing delay effect actually has this sort of cosmic sound to it. And so I thought it would be a good fit. And yeah.
That's so great.
Yeah, tell me about your experience from the beginning of this particular work.
So I just want to say I'm so incredibly grateful to Donato and the California Symphony for the invitation to play Viet Quang's Stargazer and premiere it. And I mean, nothing could be more exhilarating. And it's a work that is immediately so emotionally engaging to the audience, no matter how, educated or trained they are, whatever, in classical music. And so my daughter, for instance, after hearing it, was just in tears. It was so beautiful. And I went to spend time with Viet in your home in Las Vegas. I hesitate, before I sort of hesitated to use the word collaboration between a performer and composer, because it just seemed like the composer writes the work, the performer plays it, and so that's it. But I mean, we did have some interaction at the piano about, there's one section that you wrote where it's like, this is faster at the end, the section that's faster, and then it seemed a little untenable to have us all speeding up towards the end, so
Impossible.
so that changed. I mean, little things like that, and little figuration changes and things, but mainly it was all completely, completely done. And it's just, I mean, I love playing classical music, and there's nothing like it. But working with Viet and working with living composers is just a dream, and it gives me a sense of purpose.
Well, obviously it's something that you're very committed to. And does it mean that you're like bored by Beethoven, or do you play the classics as well?
The thing is, when we play the late Beethoven sonatas, it's breathtaking how radical it is, and you never get over how extraordinary that music is. And when you listen to Arthur Schnabel's recordings from the 1930s, they're fresher than anything. It's like, it takes your breath away. And so I revere that music and I love it, but I think we have to expand the repertoire rather than contracting.
Well, you've really done that, and thank you very much. We play some of those pieces on the air, and we really appreciate that. So thank you. And is there an extra bit of pressure and responsibility to be premiering a brand new work, especially with the composer in the audience and depending on you. What is that like for you, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to do everything you can to make it a performance that's committed and exciting and solid, and that's why, I mean, working with Viet was just such a fabulous experience, because we really spent a lot of time on the piece, and I also feel that these collaborative relationships, it's not just one time, it's not just a week. I always think in terms of a decade or 2 decades, and the composers like, you know, Terry Riley and Meredith Monk and other composers that I work with, and John Adams and so on. It's been, you know, a many decades long relationship, and that's and it only deepens with experience. And so Stargazer, you know, I want to keep playing it on and on and on and get deeper into it, and that's what music is all about, isn't it? I mean, whether it's Beethoven or Viet Cong.
Yeah, looking forward to the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 100th performance of Stargazer. Well, let's bring Matt into the conversation, and can we talk right off the bat about something that I think began with SAPECA, the collaborative partners, am I saying that correctly? I mean, the word collaboration is right there in the name. Tell us a little bit about that at the San Francisco Symphony.
Sure. But before I talk about the collaborative partners, though, I want to say a huge thanks and appreciation for the opportunity to be here, having a conversation with you guys. I live in this area, like 10 minutes away. I'm a huge fan of what the California Symphony does. I cannot tell you how lucky we are to have an organization like this right in our backyard. I would be coming to this concert even if I wasn't here on the panel. So big thanks to Lisa, to Donato, to you guys for making this possible. I feel like I've done nothing, but I'm really happy to have a chance to be a part of the conversation. The collaborative partners, so when we began having conversations with SAPECA about joining the organization as our next music director, SAPECA said really right out of the gate that he wanted to think differently about what the artistic leadership model of an orchestra looked like. And rather than have a sort of singular, monolithic artistic vision that is driving the organization, he wanted to introduce multiple other voices into the mix to be a part of what's really driving and influencing our direction, and specifically to find a group of collaborative partners, each of whom would have one foot in the world of orchestras in some way, and one foot in some other creative discipline, and in that way sort of expanding the creative connective tissue between the orchestra and other things in other parts of the world. So it's a very eclectic mix of people that includes, film score composer Nick Bertel, a brilliant jazz artist and sort of multidisciplinary thinker Esperanza Spalding. We even have an AI and computer scientist, Carol Riley, who's a part of that group. We have people like Bryce Dessner, who plays with the rock band The National by day and writes classical music by night, and people like Claire Chase, who if you read one line on their bio, it would say flute, but you very quickly realize that they are a huge force in commissioning and creating new music, and creating educational projects, and curating different kinds of experiences, and so on and so forth. So it's a really interesting group of people, and they've had a tremendous influence on the way we're thinking about things, the direction we want to go, and much of the content that we're putting on the stage.
That's very exciting. You mentioned commissioning.
Yes.
And commissions, and Sarah knows all about that. But I wanted to ask you, is there a percentage of an entire season that you say, gee, I'd like to have it be 10% brand new music that we have commissioned? What's the policy? Is there a hard, fast policy at the San Francisco Symphony?
I hate policies.
No.
No.
What are you aiming for? What's
No,
your aspiration?
it's not a comment directed to you in any way. It's really just to sort of diffuse the myth sometimes that there is a rigid structure around how these things come to be. And really, the best programming experiences are ones that are very much creatively and artistically driven. So we try to really look at and think about the range of repertoire that we could present on the broadest possible spectrum, an enormous array of music that comes from, you know, everything from Renaissance music to Baroque, classical, romantic. There's all these labels that we put on all these things, but a part of that continuum is new music that we are continuing to create. And what we really think about first and foremost is where do our current creative relationships exist? And those relationships, you know, include soloists and conductors, but they also include composers and they include directors and all kinds of things. And we try to think about, you know, who's out there that's doing really interesting work and what do they have to say, and how can we provide opportunities to showcase that and make it a part of everything else that we do. So, you know, from season to season, we may have more commissions or fewer commissions, or it may vary dramatically, but it is certainly a core part of what we do. I cannot imagine a season of the San Francisco Symphony without a substantial number of commissions as a critical part of that.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask Viet, as a composer, how much direction do you like to get? Is it even helpful to say we need a 15-minute concert opener, go? Or is it, or do you say no? I really want to wait for the inspiration to come. What is that like for you?
It really depends. Sometimes I really like to have very clear set of directions, essentially. Like, oh, we want a concert opener and it's going to be paired with these pieces. And I'm like, great. It's almost like a challenge that you can take on to write a piece that will fit beautifully within that framework.
And that's the case with Chance of Rain?
Well, Chance of Rain is interesting because it was like kind of, I remember Donato just asking me what I wanted to do, and the one piece that I don't have in my sort of portfolio yet is a concert opener. Somehow I've been become a concerto person, and that's very fun in a lot of ways, but sometimes your first sort of welcome into an organization with an orchestra is through a concert opener. And so I always just wanted to write one of those, so it was a nice opportunity to do that. But then there are other times where I like to have the freedom just because I have sort of pieces that I'm dreaming up. Like I remember one orchestra, this chamber orchestra in LA, Kaleidoscope, asked me if we could do a commission, and I was like, sure. And I was like, give me 2 weeks to think about it. And I thought about it, and then I came up with a double oboe concerto because I was working with oboe multiphonics at the time, and I wanted to have one oboist who was like kind of naughty and loved multiphonics, and the other one was very proper and buttoned up and didn't like multiphonics. And it's one of my kind of most entertaining pieces, and it was really like a blast to write. And because I just had freedom, I got to do that, and it's like the sort of play on Baroque music, because back in the Baroque era, double oboe concertos were a thing. And I don't think anyone would ever ask me to write a double oboe concerto, without me asking. So I would say yes and yes.
Yes and yes. Okay. And as a commissioner, Sarah, do you ask for something very specific? It looks like most of the things that you've asked for are for solo piano. Yep. Is that correct? And do you give any parameters or length or feel or anything that you're requesting specifically?
Yeah, I've done a few projects over the years where they're tributes to a composer like Henry Cowell's 100th birthday or Ruth Crawford Seeger's 100th birthday. And so those are sort of the parameters. But it's nice to just be more open about it. And I did a big project around the Iraq War, and some were very kind of anti-war pieces. And then Terry Riley said, I don't want to write something anti-war, I want to write something pro-peace. So he wrote this very beautiful piece called Be Kind to One Another. And anyway, yeah, it's, and also I've been sort of lucky in some ways about, I mean, the money thing is always very interesting. And I teach a class at the San Francisco Conservatory on 20th century keyboard literature, and we were just talking about the commissioning process, and I said you always have to have the money discussion right up front, and never say, you know, well, I really want you to write a piece, but I guess we'll see if I can get money later on, and you know, and I've seen many people do that, and like, well, I'll try to get something, and it's just, yeah, that doesn't seem right, but I've had some funny experiences where people say, oh, I have this extra $20,000 that I don't know what to do with, and I want to.
I hate when that happens. Yeah. So
Anyway, it's a fantastic process, and there are pieces I've gotten that I will never play ever again. A piece that I played at Cal Performances, and a friend of mine called up and said, "You have to promise me you will never play that piece ever again."
Oh my God.
And then there are some that have had long lives, like a piece I commissioned from Julia Wolf in 2001, and now it's been played by all these great young pianists. And you know, that's a really wonderful thing to see a piece have a long life, like China Gates by John Adams. I mean, it's played so much, and it's very exciting to see, you know, the life of a new piece of music and where it goes and who plays it and who sort of what happens to it.
Yeah.
Could I just add a thought about this? Actually, the funding support side of commissioning, I think, is a really interesting part of the collaboration that is often just invisible to a lot of people. They don't realize. For me, some of the most rewarding relationships that I've seen or been a part of with related to commission are between those that are supporting the art form philanthropically and the artists that are creating the art. And you know, at its worst, sometimes these things can be transactional, but really, more often than not, they're deep relationships. And when they're at their most rewarding, they're really deep relationships. And I've seen this play out numerous times where there's this incredible rapport that develops between someone who's interested in supporting the art form and an artist who's really interested in creating things. And that can be enormously influential in terms of when and how and where the art comes to life. And I think it's a really critical and valuable and rewarding part of that collaborative relationship that just a lot of people don't realize is there.
Yeah, there's some real heroes in the Bay Area. I think some real heroes who commission a lot, like Peggy Dorfman, who started out by asking William Walton to write a piece for her wedding. And I think that got her on the path. You know, when that happened, then she thought, oh, what composers am I interested in? And she's done so much great commissioning work. So people like her.
And it's a way for non-musical people to leave a legacy and to be part of the creative process. And of course, there's the flip side of that, and you know the story about Samuel Barber's violin concerto, which was, of course, incredibly beautiful. And it was commissioned by a wealthy patron of the arts who had a violinist that he was sort of sponsoring and bringing along. So he asked, and he paid Barber to write the concerto, and he wrote the first two movements and got the music to this guy. And he said, well, it's just not showy enough. I really want something more showy for this kid. And so he wrote, he was, you know, somewhat annoyed by that, and he wrote, the final movement is marked perpetual motion. And it was so difficult that the young violinist just could not possibly play it. And the commissioner said, okay, give me my money back. And Barbara said, I already spent it, you know. And so there's that. But what a glorious piece of music that is. So, you know, it's out there. It happened. So.
Or Paul Wittgenstein refusing to play Prokofiev's concerto, or you know, complaining about different concertos. Yeah,
that's for sure.
Well, let me ask you on the flip side of new music, how do you balance new music and traditional music and music that people love to hear again and again? And what is that secret recipe? It seems to me, and maybe I'm crazy, that more and more programs at places like the California Symphony and the San Francisco Symphony are presenting more new music. But in the old days, 20, 30 years ago, there was maybe an opener and then a new piece, and people were sort of, they trapped. If they wanted to get to intermission, they had to listen to the new music, and then you'd have the check fourth after intermission. Again, no formula, no rules, but do you think about, Matt, like also serving the older music as well?
Yeah, so I come at this from a very different kind of perspective, and in my mind, this idea of sort of the traditional music versus the new music is a bit of a false dichotomy, and I think it's one that we've created as programmers and administrators over many years. And in reality, like we were talking about earlier, there's this enormous spectrum of music, and Bach is old compared to Mozart, who is old compared to Beethoven, who is old compared to Stravinsky, who is old compared to Bernstein, who is old compared to Viet Cong. So there's a lot of range there, and we tend to sort of either put things in one box or the other. And in reality, I think it's less to do about something that is traditional or more modern, and I think it's more about what is familiar to us as audiences versus what is unfamiliar to us as audience. And it's a funny thing because we have lots of prefixed ideas in our head about what music is going to be like that may be unfamiliar or familiar. And just for example, we could play a piece by Alphonso Lang, who probably none of you have ever heard of. But if I played it right now, you'd immediately think you had heard this. You would say, oh, this is probably Mahler, or maybe it's Strauss, but it would sound immediately familiar to most of you, I think, even though you've never heard of that kind of composer, probably. Or by the same token, you might see something on the program by French Baroque composer named Ravel, written in the 17th century, and you'd think, oh yeah, okay, I know what this is going to be, and then you'd hear the elements, and you would think that this was some wacky, crazy sci-fi soundtrack. You'd never think it was written in 16-something. And it just goes to show that those assumptions are really a big part of it. So I think really what it comes down to is thinking about how we present the music, what we say about it, what's the context in which we present it, and what are the audience expectations? What are we telling the audience or not telling the audience about this music before they come in? When is it really effective to give people a lot of information? When is it effective to give people a little bit of teaser about what something is going to be? And when is it actually most effective to tell the audience absolutely nothing about it? Because curiosity is a really, really powerful concert programming tool. So I think, when I think about balance, I think about what are the audience's expectations, what's the level of familiarity with different elements, regardless of sort of the time period of when something was written.
Well, yet I wanted to ask you, when you're composing, do you ever feel like you're collaborating with dead composers? Or do you ever have influences creep into your music, and that's perfectly fine?
Yeah, certainly. Like this double oboe concerto I mentioned, like the first 2 or 3 minutes of the piece, I want it to sound like a Baroque oboe concerto. So it was like, what would Viet Cong sound like if he was an Italian Baroque composer? And then so it's, because it's kind of like when you're writing music, you're taking all the influences that you've heard in your life and funneling them down into something that feels like you. And even like when I was writing that oboe concerto, at first I really wanted it to sound exactly like Vivaldi, actually. But the more I wrote it, it just didn't sound like Vivaldi, because it was just like me channeling this type of music, this Baroque music. and like my influences are sort of all over the place. Like for a piece like Stargazer, the chord progressions are like pop chord progressions, because this piece is like, for me, was a way to find healing, and I kind of followed back memories of when I was younger, and I would improvise on these pop chord progressions as a kid, and that brought me comfort, and so I wanted to kind of revisit those. Every piece I want to reference anything, but it's just like what comes naturally to me when I sit at the piano and I start a piece, and it kind of goes from there.
Did I read that you're in the process of getting your PhD at Princeton, or did that happen?
That happened,
It
thank
happened,
goodness.
okay. And were you able to submit a piece of music as your thesis, or?
Yes, so I submitted I have this piece called Renewal, which is a percussion quartet concerto. So I wrote a dissertation about how I made, that piece exists in 4 versions. There's a chamber orchestra version, full symphonic orchestra, wind ensemble, and chamber winds. And the dissertation is about how I adapted the piece between the 4 versions and how it almost felt like each one is its own composition. Titles, Adaptation as Composition, Flexible Approaches in Renewal.
Wow, wow, that's impressive. Let me ask you, all of you, if you have in mind projects that are happening soon or coming up in the next couple of seasons that you're really excited about that represent wonderful collaboration for new music. And of course, here we are in the midst of the California Festival, which is, you know, and I feel like it's going to happen again. Do you think it might come back next year? Or is it too soon to say? But
I think one of the things we're really interested in doing is seeing what the response is to this festival at the end of it, having conversations. But the response so far has been so tremendous that it's hard for me to imagine that we wouldn't continue to nurture this idea.
yeah, it feels great. So anything on the horizon that you want to just point out it's a wonderful example of collaboration and new music?
I mean, I just to toot my own horn for just a moment, I put on, and this is in June, but I started this summer solstice concert at the Chapel of the Chimes in Oakland.
Oh my God,
And
it's
but
so awesome.
And the thing is that, thank you, yeah, it is, but I think in terms of collaboration, sort of finding an unusual space, and, you know, because this is a columbarium and crematorium and mausoleum, and, you know, it's unlikely, but it's this beautiful Julia Morgan designed labyrinthine, sort of maze-like place with gardens and skylights, and it's really gorgeous. I mean, little enclosed gardens and chapels and things. And so I place all these experimental music groups there, and then Kitka, the Balkan Women's Ensemble, performs, and so it's very popular, but it's a wacky new music event. And I think something like that is great. Before the pandemic, it was a problem because there were 4,000 people coming, and now we have to limit it to 2,500, and we just take all the money and split it up among all the musicians, and that's how it works, because we're like a volunteer group of 3 people. But I think finding ways to do local projects, you know, and thinking creatively, like the San Francisco Symphony does. I mean, like sort of like you do with the collaborative partners, but also just, you know, your wonderful programming and commissioning. Yeah, and also outreach. I mean, the California Symphony has such wonderful outreach and social media, and sort of getting the word out to younger audiences is so important. And Viet, I know you've done outreach events for the California Symphony.
Well, I meant to say at the top of our conversation that there would come a time when we would entertain your questions and your answers and any insights that you might have. So hold that thought, and we'll kind of wrap up, and then we'll turn it over to you. Yeah, so any other exciting things on the
I want to ask Viet about, you just had some songs premiered. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I just wrote a song cycle that are 3 Vietnamese poems, and I set them for soprano and chamber winds and percussion. And I don't speak Vietnamese anymore. It was my first language, but I forgot when I was about 5, and it was a really wonderful way to sort of revisit my roots. And it's funny, my mom, she retired recently and digitized a bunch of home video. There's this video of me sitting on the kitchen table when I was 3 years old. I'm speaking Vietnamese. And it's the weirdest thing when you look at like a video of yourself and you don't know what you're saying. So that was really beautiful. And I was with this Vietnamese conductor named Vu Nguyen, who teaches at University of Pacific. And afterwards, I remember getting so emotional during it. And I hugged Vu backstage and I just said thank you. And I was just like sobbing because it felt like through writing those pieces, I was saying something that I was searching to say for like the last 30 years of my life. And it was really beautiful.
Where can we hear them?
Probably soon. We recorded them.
Oh.
So I hope to make
Send them my way.
I hope to make an orchestral version of that at some point, maybe with chamber orchestra. But it's this amazing soprano named Big Van Nguyen, who is just I can't imagine any soprano other than her singing it.
That's great.
And it's funny, we collaborated on that piece because Vietnamese is a tonal language, so certain words have to go up or down a certain amount, or else it could mean something very different. And so I set the melody, it went up a half step. And I was like, it's a half step. It's like the closest like interval on a piano. It's like, well, both those words don't really have to go any, like they should stay level, but a half step shouldn't matter. And I sent it to Big Van, and she was like, when that goes up, it sounds like cockroach. And so I had to rewrite the melody for that whole first song.
So interesting.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Well, someone mentioned, did you mention the bar? No, we're talking about how do you engage audiences. And I just want to compliment the California Symphony because you can take your wine into the concert hall. What other ways do you like take people away from everything else that is distracting them? And also at the same time, I wanted to ask you about bringing in young people, and you were talking about outreach, but any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'd love to just shamelessly plug is a phenomenal series that was started about 7 or 8 years ago. It's called Soundbox at the San Francisco Symphony, where the whole concept is really rooted in the idea of collaboration on many different levels. But it's if you haven't been there, it's a sort of black box theater that sounds like a broom closet on a good day, but we have the benefit of this extraordinary sound system designed by a company based right around the corner in Berkeley, Meyer Sound, created a constellation system that actually creates a stunning acoustic that's incredibly flexible and varied, and we turned it into something that's sort of half nightclub, half concert hall, and we present the most eclectic range of music that really runs the gamut, and it all revolves around a theme that's developed by a guest curator, and the environment is very transformative because there's sort of projection screens all around you, but they're more about sort of creating a sense of immersiveness. They're architectural projection as opposed to like content projection most of the time. And we have a bar, and you can have drinks, and you can socialize, and you can talk about what's going on. But it's been an incredible opportunity to really completely turn upside down all of our expectations about what we think about music and what music is and how people respond to it and who comes to things. And it's been a really tremendous source of inspiration for us. And for us, it's more than just the concert series. It's sort of our R&D lab, and it's where we learn a lot about how we're thinking about concert experience and where we go from here. And there are numerous projects that have grown out of ideas that were born in Soundbox, and there's one that I'll just mention real quick. On Tuesday, I believe, we're going to be announcing another new collaboration that's going to be happening in March, right around the corner. And I can't really tell you what it is yet, not until Tuesday. I'm sworn to secrecy, but look out for the announcement on Tuesday. But it's attached to a program featuring a work by Scriabin called The Poem of Ecstasy, which the composer had synesthesia, which is a sort of association between different senses, and wrote into that score a part for something he called a color organ because of his association between light and different color centers. And we're playing with that idea and reimagining that experience in a whole different way that will change what you think concerts can be. And that much of that thought process is born out of collaborations that happen in Soundbox.
The other interesting thing about, one interesting thing about Soundbox is that it's from the very beginning, the programs have been secret. And I think as classical musicians, we're so used to, reading like, what are they playing? They're doing this and this and this and this. So do I want to go based on that? But Soundbox doesn't have any of that. It's just the program is secret and you just go because it's a great experience.
Yeah, that's one of the most powerful lessons actually that we've learned from Soundbox is that what an audience, we were talking about this a minute ago, what an audience knows or doesn't know about a program dramatically changes the way they respond and react to music. Actually, there's a great story real quick. A friend of mine from a long time ago, conductor Marcus Stenz, was leading an orchestra in a completely different part of the world. And he had this series where he had this great repertoire that he wanted to be able to present and he believed in and loved and was convinced by, but was concerned that certain associations with various composer names would be an immediate turnoff and people wouldn't come. So he started this series where it was usually like one massive work, big 40, 50, 60 minute sprawling work, and the audience would have no idea what it was until the very end, and then he would reveal. And he, to launch this series, presented this work that is sort of notorious for not selling tickets. It's a piece by Schoenberg called Gurrelieder. And he goes through this, and he develops such a rapport with the audiences that the concert was completely sold out. And people are listening, and people were totally taken with this music, loved this music, and that at the very end there's like a big banner that unfurls and says Schoenberg Gurrelieder, and it's amazing because it totally turned upside down what our expectations are about different kinds of music. So I totally agree with you. I think it's one of the most potent things that are underlooked is the power of curiosity in music.
And the trust that the audience has in the organization. It's like, they'll do well by me.
Yeah.
Does anyone have anything they want to add, ask? Yes, sir.
I don't know, Diane, if this is really about collaboration, but it's sort of about the concert scene now, and it seems like you've been pretty broadly based in your remarks. So we seem like we're kind of just getting out of COVID, and hopefully, there aren't going to be any more variants, and we're going to go on and be able to do real concerts and concert seasons again. So my question is, as recently as just a year or so ago, we were all about hybrid. And I wondered, as a composer and a performer and a presenter, hybrid or just streamed concerts, I wondered, did you learn anything about that? There was anything about it that you enjoyed as a composer, hearing your music being streamed or performing a recital only streamed or trying to present a concert series with a symphony in that way? Was there anything that was good about it? Is there anything that we learned that we can use going forward? And is there anything about it that impacted collaboration?
Can I just say, Parker Monroe, you are now Executive Director of Chanticleer? And
Board chair.
Board chair of Chanticleer, and you were Executive Director of the New Century Chamber Orchestra for many years.
Hi, Parker.
Hi.
Snuck in. But that's a great question, and I think silver linings of the pandemic, go.
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts and feelings about all of this, but there are a mix of things, right? So I think we went through many different phases of learning through that experience because we've never been so deeply entrenched in the world of thinking about media and streaming as we were in that moment of the pandemic. But one of the first lessons we learned is that simply trying to replicate the live concert experience on video just feels like a cheap imitation, right? It's not the same thing. And in one of the huge lessons is there is no substitution for live performance. Live, absolutely. There's a very human connection that happens live, and you can't replicate that online. On the other hand, we also learned that when you don't try to do that, but when you think of film and streaming those things as a completely different, unique medium, and you're actually creating and designing for that medium, and especially when what you're creating is connected to in some broader way, some realm of live performance, it can be an incredibly powerful tool, actually. And I think a lot of it is just, we're just on the forefront of really learning and understanding how to leverage various media tools in connection with live performance in various ways to sort of expand our creative palette. But we cannot think of it as substitution. As soon as we do that, we failed.
Good example of that, actually, because I started my California Symphony residency. I remember I got the call in February of 2020. A month later, everything changed, and one of my favorite pieces I've written in the last 5 years is this piece called Next Week's Trees, which was my first commission with the California Symphony. It's just for string orchestra, and we wrote for string orchestra because they could be masked, they were socially distanced, and they did a really amazingly beautiful video of it, where again, it wasn't like you were saying, it wasn't just like a camera in the back of a hall and they just pressed record. It was like multiple camera angles, and watching it, it feels so dynamic and vibrant, and it just sounds great, even though I think it was one take. I don't know if Donato can confirm that, but the orchestra is that good. But yeah, and I think that another sort of silver lining of the pandemic was it kind of forced me as a composer to look inward and just think about, well, what do I really want to write when I just am not worrying about the rest of the world and what they have, the expectations they have for me. It kind of like freed me from worrying about these voices in my head that other people put in there. And I could just focus on my inner voice, and I think my music matured a lot in those couple years. And in some ways it got simpler, but it's more mature. And I think back to like the pieces I was writing in 2019, and it feels like a much younger version of myself. Like feels like 10 or 20 years younger than what I am writing now and what I wrote during COVID, including Stargazer. And so there was a silver lining to it.
I love that story about why you wrote Next Week's Trees for string orchestra, and I can just see that in the liner notes, for hundreds of years to come. Well, this is so interesting because there was a time when people had to wear masks. Yes.
Hi.
Sunshine.
Sunshine Duffner, General Manager of California Symphony, full disclosure. But I love, Viet, that you took that example to respond to this question, because kind of the flip follow-up question to that for me is, how did that change for you when Next Week's Trees was then performed for a live audience at the first concert coming out of lockdown? Because it was essentially the same piece set essentially almost for film, but for string orchestra in a mini film, and then to a live audience.
It was so different because in this piece, I'm trying to make this string orchestra, and the way that Stargazer, I want the piano to sound like it's attached to a guitar delay pedal. I wanted the string orchestra to sound like it was attached to a guitar delay pedal. So it starts with like 3 minutes of pizzicato, and every note like echoes like bum, 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 and all these like sort of melodies emerge from that. And when you watch a video of that, it's like, okay, this is like something I hear when I am watching documentaries. It's like a popular effect, sound effect. And so it's like, well, this is cool watching an orchestra do it, but it's almost like, yeah, it makes sense. But when you watch it live, there is that sort of realization, like this is all happening like acoustically, and there are no electronics, and this is just the sound that's coming at me right now, and every note is being played. So it's a much different experience live, and I like both a lot. I don't know if I have a favorite, but definitely live was really special to hear it that way.
Anyone else with a question or comment? Yes.
You can run, but you can't hide, you know. Okay, I'm a symphony gadfly, so that's why I made that comment. Okay, so we were talking about outreach and new music and so forth when we were looking at the program for not this season, but the last season. And I was looking at it and saying, oh, I see what you're doing here. It's Concerto in F and Emergency Shelter Intake Form and Scheherazade and Her Story. It's like, okay, you're putting a beloved piece with a brand new piece. And yet, you know where I sit, I'm over in Terraslab. And so I get to see the whole hall pretty much every time. I didn't see it with Concerto in F, and my heart breaks because it's like, the hall is like 40% sold for these concerts. And Concerto in F Emergency Shelter Intake Form was one of the best concerts I've seen in a long time. I think everybody should be playing this piece. And yet, people aren't showing up. What do we do?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for showing up, for being there. I know you're there frequently, and it's amazing to have people that not only support the organization, but are passionate advocates and sort of tell the story. And it's a really important moment, particularly in San Francisco, to do exactly that, because there's a trend that occurred all across the country, not just in San Francisco, but during the pandemic, people's habits of going out and doing things were broken in a way that has very long-lasting impacts. And it has changed the face of who our audiences are in the concert hall for a long time to come. The flip side to that, though, the really interesting thing that's happening in this moment is that we have, of the people who are there, we have a far higher percentage of people who are new to the organization, in our case, are new to the art form, new to this type of music, and they're showing up and responding tremendously well. One of the things that's really interesting to see is the number of people who are coming for the first time, last year or the year before after the pandemic, who are now coming again, coming more frequently, and starting to buy packages of tickets and things like that. That's a really encouraging sign. But it's really incumbent upon all of us as a community of people who love this art form to spread the word, right? To tell people, to bring a friend, to get people to experience. And I really believe that if the experience is curated well enough, if it's done with the right degree of heart and passion, and the story you're telling is compelling, we're actually in an incredible moment of opportunity to build what is going to be the next generation for this art form. That's a huge, huge opportunity, and I'm sure we all feel that same responsibility to nurture and create that. So thank you for saying that. Thank you for being an advocate. Thank you for coming.
If there's anything more I can do, let me know. And hey, Harper, good to see you.
Well, it's very true that the audience is a really important element in the collaborative process of making new music and old music and art in general. So thank you all for being here. And the bar is open for another couple minutes, I think, another 30 minutes, Lisa says. Okay, so, and thank you all for your time, Matt, Sarah.